On January 23, 1897, a boy pushing open his neighbor's front door in West Virginia found a young woman dead at the bottom of a staircase. Her name was Zona Shue. Her husband had dressed the body before the doctor arrived. 5 months later, that husband stood trial for her murder. And the trial, 8 days in a Greenbrier County courtroom in the summer of 1897, became the most famous ghost story in American legal history. The state of West Virginia commemorated it decades on with a roadside marker of Interstate 64. The marker reads, "Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband Edward. Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer." That last line is not what happened. The records prove it. The prosecutor in this case did not want to use the ghost. He thought it would tank his conviction, so he kept it off his witness list. The defense brought it up, trying to make the victim's mother look insane on cross-examination. They were the ones who put a ghost on the official trial record. It did not go the way they planned. See, this was not the first wife he would survive. Eventually, he was convicted on physical evidence, and the woman who actually put him in prison is not on the sign. Erasmus Stribling Shue arrived in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, in the autumn of 1896. He was 35 years old. He told everyone his name was Edward. People who knew him called him Trout. He found work at James Cruikshank's blacksmith shop within a few days of arriving, and within a few weeks he had set his eyes on a young local woman named Elva Zona Heaster. They were married on October 20th, 1896. Nobody in Greenbrier County knew about the 2 marriages he had left behind him. His first wife was Allie Esteline Cutlip. They had married in 1885 and had a daughter, Geerta. 3 years in, Allie was raising the child alone, and Trout was in the state penitentiary for stealing a horse. She filed for divorce while he was still inside. The decree cited cruelty. She testified that he had beaten her repeatedly throughout the marriage. His second wife was Lucy Ann Tritt. They married in 1894. 8 months later, Lucy was dead. Trout's account: she had fallen and hit her head on a rock. Almost no one believed him. There was no investigation, no autopsy, no charges. Within months, Trout had left town. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, did not know any of this. She had her own reasons for caution. 2 years earlier, in 1895, Zona had borne a son out of wedlock. The Greenbrier County birth book lists the father as supposed to be George Wooldridge. When Trout Shue arrived the next autumn, handsome, charming, in a hurry to marry, Mary Jane was already wary of men who promised fast. She did not trust this one. 3 months and 3 days later, her daughter would be dead at the bottom of a staircase, and Trout Shue would be standing over the body before anyone else got there. On the morning of January 23, 1897, Trout walked over to a neighbor's house. He told Aunt Martha Jones that Zona was not feeling well and asked if her 11-year-old son Andy could come over and check on her. Andy went a couple of hours later. He knocked on the door. He got no answer. He pushed it open. What he found is where this episode opened. By the time the local doctor and coroner, a man named George Knapp, got to the house an hour after Andy ran for help, the body was no longer on the floor. Trout had carried his wife upstairs and laid her out on the bed. He had also dressed her in a high-collared dress with a large veil tied around her neck. In Greenbrier County in 1897, women prepared the dead, not husbands, not fast. That was the first irregularity. Knapp tried to examine the body. Trout cradled Zona's head in his lap and wept. Whenever the doctor leaned in to look at her neck, Trout would shift the body, hold the head, sob harder. Knapp later admitted the examination had been cursory. He never got a clean look. He had been treating Zona for what he called female trouble a few weeks earlier, so he wrote it down and called it cause of death, an everlasting faint. Then, after the burial, he quietly amended the cause on the official return to childbirth. Neither side at trial would ever bring that diagnosis up. Mary Jane brought the body home for the wake. Trout never left the coffin. He propped Zona's head with a pillow on one side and a rolled-up cloth on the other to keep it from moving. He explained, tearfully, that the scarf around her neck had been her favorite. People at the wake noticed her head seemed loose. People started talking, and one of them was already certain she knew exactly what had happened. Mary Jane Heaster was a Methodist farmer's wife in her mid-50s. Plain-spoken, practical, not by any account a woman given to visions. She did not need a ghost to tell her something was wrong with how her daughter had died. When she had first heard Zona was dead, she had said, out loud in front of her family,
"The devil killed her."
After the wake, she took a sheet from inside her daughter's coffin. There was a strange smell to it. She tried to give it back to Trout. He refused. So she took it home and washed it. The water in the basin turned blood red. The sheet stained pink. When she poured the water out, the water itself ran clear. Modern chemistry has an explanation. Iron chloride compounds were a routine part of blacksmithing, and Trout had handled the body extensively before anyone else could examine it. The chemistry is mundane, the implication is not. For 4 weeks, Mary Jane prayed. She asked her daughter to come back and tell her how she had died. By her own later testimony, for 4 nights in a row, Zona did. The room would grow cold. A light would appear at the foot of the bed. Then her daughter would stand there and describe what had happened. That Trout had come home angry that she had not cooked any meat for supper, attacked her, and broken her neck. Whatever you make of that, and people have been making all kinds of things of it for over a century, what Mary Jane did next was not supernatural. She walked into the office of the county prosecuting attorney, John Alfred Preston. She told him she believed her son-in-law had murdered her daughter. She told him about the body, the dressing, the scarf, the sheet, the way Trout had blocked the doctor from doing his job. And she told him about the ghost. Preston listened. He was not going to act on a ghost story alone. So he started with Knapp, who admitted his examination had been cursory. He spoke to people who had been at the wake. They confirmed every strange thing about Trout's behavior. By the time Preston applied for a court order to exhume the body, the case for digging her up did not rest on Mary Jane's visions. It rested on a botched examination, a suspicious presentation, and a husband who had behaved like a man with something to hide. When they dug her up, in the middle of a snowstorm, what they found beneath the high collar would prove every word Mary Jane had said. On February 22, 1897, 3 doctors exhumed Zona Heaster Shue and performed an autopsy in a nearby schoolhouse. It took 3 hours. The Pocahontas Times reported the findings on March 12th.
The neck was broken and the windpipe mashed. On the throat were the marks of fingers indicating that she had been choked.
She had been strangled. Then her neck had been broken. Trout was arrested and held in the Lewisburg jail. A reporter for the Pocahontas Times got a quote out of him. "They will not be able to prove I did it." That is not a denial. That is a man calculating his odds. The first thing the prosecutor did when the trial started was leave Mary Jane Heaster off the witness list. Trout Shue's first-degree murder trial began on June 22, 1897, in Greenbrier Circuit Court. It lasted 8 days. This is where the popular version of the story falls apart. John Alfred Preston, the county prosecuting attorney, had a problem. His most important witness was the same woman who had been telling everyone in Greenbrier County for 5 months that she had been visited by her daughter's ghost. Preston was worried the story would tank his case in front of a jury, so he kept Mary Jane off the stand and focused on the facts. The defense had its own problem. The autopsy was devastating. The pattern of dead wives, once people had started looking, was devastating. Witnesses to Trout's behavior at the wake were lining up to testify. The defense lawyer, William Parks Rucker, did what defense lawyers sometimes do when the facts are bad. He went after the witness, most likely to lose her composure on cross-examination. He called Mary Jane Heaster. He started his cross with a question that was meant to break her. This is from the trial transcript, still on file in the West Virginia State Archives.
I have heard that you had some dream or vision which led to this post-mortem examination.
He wanted her to say yes. He wanted the jury to look at her and see a grieving woman who had imagined a ghost. He wanted her ridiculed. Here's what she said.
It was no dream. She came back and told me that he was mad that she didn't have no meat cooked for supper. But she said she had plenty, and said that she had butter and apple butter, apples, and named over 2 or 3 kinds of jellies, pears and cherries and raspberry jelly.
She named what was in her daughter's pantry the night she was murdered. She was specific. She was calm. The defense lawyer kept pressing. She did not break. This is where the trial went sideways for Trout Shue. The judge could have instructed the jury to disregard her testimony about the ghost. He could not, cleanly, because the defense had brought it up. Striking it would have looked like the court taking a side, so the testimony stayed in the room. But the prosecution never asked the jury to convict on it. Preston's case was the autopsy, the pattern, the behavior at the wake, the doctor's failed examination, Trout's own jailhouse statement. The jury went out. They came back in 70 minutes. Guilty of murder in the first degree. 10 of the 12 jurors voted to hang him. Capital sentencing required unanimous. Trout Shue got life. He nearly didn't make it to prison. On July 11, 1897, about 2 weeks after the verdict, a group of 15 to 30 men, well armed, with a new rope, gathered outside Lewisburg and started toward the jail. They wanted to lynch him. The sheriff caught wind of it and got Trout out of town. A magistrate's warrant from July 12th, naming the men who had organized the mob, is still in the Greenbrier County Courthouse collection. Trout Shue was sent to the West Virginia Penitentiary at Moundsville. He died there in March of 1900 in a flu epidemic. His body was unclaimed. Mary Jane Heaster lived another 19 years. She never recanted. She told the story the same way, in the same words, until the day she died, to neighbors, to journalists, to anyone who would listen. She had been right from the morning she heard her daughter was dead. And then, decades after the trial, the state of West Virginia put up a sign by the road. It is the marker we read at the start of this episode. It names a ghost as the witness in this case. It does not name her. This is how history gets filtered. When a story has a supernatural detail and a procedural one, the supernatural one wins. It wins the road sign. It wins the novels and the stage musicals. Procedure stays in the archive. Salem is remembered as supernatural panic, not as a land dispute with factional politics underneath it. The Amityville murders survive in memory as a haunting, not as the family annihilation that actually happened in that house. The Bell Witch eclipsed what was, almost certainly, a long-running pattern of domestic abuse in a Tennessee farmhouse. Greenbrier is the same shape. The autopsy convicted Trout Shue. The pattern of dead wives convicted Trout Shue. A mother who refused to let it go convicted Trout Shue. A ghost did not. The ghost got the marker. Mary Jane did the work. If you liked the video and want to be notified as soon as a new episode is released, please consider hitting the like button and subscribe. And if you want a specific historical topic that might be unknown to a lot of people covered here, leave a comment. Thank you for watching and stay curious.